colleagues from across Canada join us. Welcome, everyone. It's always, although we're online, I can always feel the energy of the sector. And so it's always a good way. At OCASI, we love to convene these meetings. It's often the first time, a few times that as colleagues in the sector that we get to see and know each other just a little bit more by sharing spaces like this and having these kinds of important conversations that help our work as we move forward. My name is Debbie Douglas, and I'm the Executive Director of OCASI, for those who I haven't yet had the pleasure to meet. Welcome to this next webinar in our anti-racism series funded by Immigration and Refugees Incidentship Canada. This is part of the webinar and conversation series by OCASI for the Ontario immigrant and refugee serving sector to move from intention to action in understanding systemic racism, addressing racial discrimination, and building towards a racial equity in the sector and beyond. Before we begin our session, I would like to walk us through some logistics that can help make our individual and our collective participation safer and more comfortable. Thank you, Parveen, for sharing the slides. Safety and comfort. Your safety and comfort are important to us. We strongly recommend that you be considerate and respectful when speaking and interacting via chat, but also while posting questions and when unmuted to make comments. We take this very seriously at OCASI, so anyone who violates these norms will be removed from the meeting. We do not tolerate racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, economic discrimination, class discrimination, you name it, we will name it, and we will ask you to remove yourself. If you need assistance at any time, please reach out to OCASI staff by sending a direct message to tech support. If you see in the chat, I'm sure someone is putting a link in there where you can reach out to OCASI staff for tech support. Zoom fatigue is real. It's been almost 5 years since we've been doing this in almost a full-time basis since the pandemic. So we know that Zoom fatigue is real. Do what you need to do to take care of you first. Stand up, move, remove yourself if you're being triggered, have a water, do a bit of stretching. Stay present and be attentive to your body and to your emotions. Recording and interaction. We encourage you to use your real name to facilitate discussion and engagement, but we understand that if you prefer to remain anonymous for
Debbie's connection is a bit unstable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can continue with the housekeeping. Amy, let me know if you want me to do that.
Yes, please go ahead, Samya.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Samya Hasan. When Debbie's back, she can let you know I'm the moderator for this
I'm
session today.
actually back.
Oh,
So
she's
let
back.
me,
Okay.
yes,
Go ahead, Debbie.
I am at Ryerson University, TMU, and we're having significant problems with our tech connections here today. So I won't take up much more of your time. This event will be conducted in English. However, we do have simultaneous French translation as well as American Sign Language translation. A warm welcome to our interpreters who have worked with OCASI for many, many years. For the audio, please use interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. If it's not showing up as interpretation, if you go into your more with the 3 dots, it should show up there. And choose your language of choice, French or English. And now on with our session. Before I introduce you to our moderator for this morning, it is always a pleasure for me to begin to acknowledge the land where we are today. I just finished making a presentation downstairs to another OCASI event that's happening on gender-based violence. And I was sharing with our colleagues from across the country that whenever I think, one of the things that I'm thankful for living here in Toronto is that Toronto is actually treaty territory amongst First Nations. Our territory is the dish with one spoon, wampum belt, and just that image of a dish with one spoon that reminds us that there is enough for everyone. The one spoon means that we all take what it is that we need and we leave the rest for others to be able to take what it is that they need. It also reminds us that we have a responsibility to care for the lands and the waters around us, joining First Peoples in taking care of our environment. So welcome. Toronto is also Treaty 13 territory and is home to many, many First Nations, especially the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Good. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Samya Hasan. Their links for the bios are in your chat, so I won't say more than that. So Samya is our moderator for this year's series, our 24-25 year anti-racism series. Samya, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Devi. So as mentioned, my name is Samya Hasan. I'm the Executive Director for the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians, and it's my pleasure to introduce and moderate our panelists for today. This is my second moderation. We've had one last year in December. And then we will have a few more to come in this year until March. So today I have the pleasure to introduce Hermia Corbette, who is the Executive Director of the Community Development Council of Durham. Again, the bios are in the chat, so I don't have to read them all out to you today. And we also have the pleasure of having Christopher Stuart Taylor, who is the Associate Vice President of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion and Anti-Racism at the University of Waterloo. He's also the assistant professor in the Department of History. So we are going to be talking about managing an anti-racism workplace today and what it looks like for you as organizations that are serving immigrants and refugees. So I'm going to pass it over to Hermia and Christopher first to take about 5 to 7 minutes to introduce themselves, to locate themselves personally, professionally, and just talk about what this theme means to them. So we can start with Hermia and then we can pass it off to Chris. Go ahead.
Thank you, Samya. Always great to be in your company. Good morning, everyone. It's a cold winter day, so I hope you're warm and safe wherever you are. Thank you for joining today's conversation, and thank you to OCASI for inviting me to be part of this important conversation. My name is Hermia Corbette, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Development Council Durham. Throughout my conversation, I'll refer to our agency as CDCD. I'm honored to join you today to explore practical strategies and approaches for building anti-racist, anti-oppressive organizations. But to do so, let me just take a moment to look at myself personally and professionally within this work. So I identify myself as a woman of color and an Afro-Caribbean Canadian immigrant. I have a social work background that focuses on policy, organization, and community development work. I also completed studies in organizational psychology, women's studies, DEI studies, family, and organizational mediation. Also, my lived experiences navigating systemic inequities have profoundly shaped my approach to leadership and community work. And as I was writing, and reflecting on the questions that we have for today, there's a memory that became very vivid to me. And I think it also influenced who I am today. It's a memory when I first came to Canada. I would have just migrated from the Caribbean. And I was attempting to access services over the phone. And during that call, I was unexpectedly asked, "Are you Black?" And being from the Caribbean, the good majority of us are Black. And so it just made me pause for a moment. I was taken aback when I was asked that question. And I have to say, I felt that my race may disqualify me from receiving that service, just the tone and the way in which it was asked. And so through that very profound early on experience, it has just stayed with me and reminds me that there are barriers that so many individuals face daily. And so experiences like that have fueled my determination to create spaces where all people, regardless of our social location, that we get spaces where we can be seen, valued, heard, and supported to thrive. So let me just share about my professional background. I've worked in not-for-profit sector in various leadership roles, leading youth, newcomer, volunteer, and senior programming for 18 years. And at present, I'm really humbled to be leading CDCD. We are a not-for-profit charitable organization that has served as the Social Planning Council of Durham region for over 50 years. Actually, let me be more precise, because this year we're really celebrating 55 years of service. And we have remained true to our commitment to supporting individuals and families in our community. Our work focuses on newcomers, immigrants, asylum claimants, government-assisted refugees, equity-deserving groups, equity-seeking groups, marginalized communities. And we do that through programming such as settlement, resettlement, homelessness prevention, housing retention, community and civic engagement, and social research. So at CDCD, we're deeply committed to embedding anti-racism and anti-oppressive principles into the core of our policies, program, and culture. And one of the most important lessons I learned as a servant leader is that this work isn't something that you can do once and just move on. Earlier today, both Chris and I, we were saying it's a continuous journey of learning. You learn, you unlearn, you become open to learning more, and you have to be prepared to do it again. It means taking a hard look at our own conscious and unconscious biases. We have to challenge systemic barriers. We have to work together to create those safe spaces, safer spaces where everyone can feel heard and valued. It also involves me being vulnerable and also sometimes just really having to be humble and to admit that I don't do it right. Our organization doesn't always do it right. As leaders, we don't always do it right. And so with that, I'll share another moment. I'll give a lot of examples as I give my responses to the questions. So I remember a moment when a staff member, and I think that person was being very courageous because they pointed out to me, because I thought that our menus for our staff events and come-together gatherings were already diverse. They said, no, Hermia, it needs to be even more inclusive. And so I remember calling Debbie to ask, what do you do in circumstances like that? It's one staff, but all the same, the staff have put something forward. And so we want to honor that person, acknowledge where they are. So, staff come to us and they bravely ask us to look at our processes, look at the way we do programming, asking us to also ensure that we address equity and intersectionality by looking at things from those lenses. And so it's those conversations and so many others that I have had, they serve as true reminders for me that anti-racism work, it must be guided by the voices and experiences of those who are directly impacted, be it staff, be it clients, be it volunteers, be it ourselves or, the colleagues we interact with, partners, that work gets to be guided by them. And that is acceptable. That is correct. So I know that many of you in this session may be grappling with the complexities of implementing anti-racism and anti-oppression policies in your organizations. And sometimes you've probably even felt isolated or unsure where to begin. I have felt that way. I continue to feel that way. And when I do, I seek support. So I guess I just want to say and to assure you that those feelings are not uncommon. Change at this level is challenging, but on the flip side, it can just be so deeply rewarding. So for today, we will be sharing practical tools and strategies and examples, but we also encourage connection because to build an anti-racist and anti-oppressive workplace, it's not something that we can do alone. It involves collaboration. mutual accountability, courage to ask questions and to share answers and to share ideas. And so I'm really pleased to be part of this panel where we can learn together from one another's experiences and that collectively we can advance the work of creating more inclusive environments where we all feel we belong. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And I look forward to the conversation with Samya and Christopher, as well as yourselves. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Hermia. Christopher, go ahead.
Good morning, folks. Just want to make sure everyone can hear and see me clearly. If not, just let me know or let Samya know. Thank you very much. I think Hermia did a fantastic job locating why we're here and what we are here to do. And the term that I use is social constructivism, that we are in an environment to learn from each other. We don't have all the answers. We have our professional experiences in this particular space, but we are here to have a conversation, to share experiences, to share lessons learned, to share pros and cons, because we all make mistakes. A colleague of mine had always mentioned to me that we need to come from a place of practice. The term that she used was have a posture of practice, not a posture of perfection. Because a lot of the times when we do this work, particularly in leadership positions, or even if you're a parent, your child comes to you and asks you, what's the meaning of life? And you must have an answer. And you have absolutely no idea what the meaning of life is. But if you tell your child, I don't know, all of a sudden your authority is gone. You are no longer that superhero that they thought you were. But in order, and as Hermia has set the stage, in order for us to learn, we need to have that humility. We need to say, you know what? I don't know. And so this is me locating my professional self here. Yes, I am the Associate Vice President of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism at the University of Waterloo. I am also an assistant professor in the Department of History at the University of Waterloo, but I'm also a lifelong learner. I love school, the ins and outs of school. But one thing that I have learned as I've gone through my career in academia, school isn't just what you learn in four walls. Curricula isn't the fact that you had to go and pay tuition and get a degree or a diploma or a certificate. We need to, and we have a lot of conversations around this, and this is how I interpret my own professional self. We need to have a anti-colonial and decolonial understanding of education. We need to understand that just because something was not written in a book, it was passed down through oral histories, what we say in West Africa, the griots, Griots, that our histories have been passed down through the spoken word, through conversation from our elders, is critically important. Because one thing that I've learned, and particularly through my own research and just conversations over holidays with folks in Barbados from where I'm from, we like to privilege people's stories if they were quote unquote important. If they were a politician, if they were a king or a queen, but every single person that we interact with has a valid story, particularly when it comes to the immigrant or newcomer story. Hermia mentioned her story there is a fantastic story. I picked up the phone and someone asked me if I was Black. I'm like, what? How can we now take that story and start seeing how that fits into racism and anti-Black racism within not just our immigration system, but within Canadian society? So this is my professional location. That, yes, I have degrees and DR, PhD, all that good fun stuff, great, but they're just letters. It's any conversation I have with anybody from my professional self, I always take with value and I take with truth and validity. And personally, that's how I exist in my world as well. You know, my parents or my father was a part of the Windrush generation, coming from Barbados, going to the UK through London Transport. A mother came to Canada through as a teacher, a second generation Barbadian Bajan here, been back and forth my entire life as a dual citizen. That's the space that I exist in, that I have learned that I exist on a margin. And this margin being that, yes, while I am Canadian, the world perceives me as just a Black man, someone who should not belong in Canadian society. And I always mention to folks, I have had the privilege, the real privilege, to spend years of my life dedicated to learning about who I am and who my family is. So again, this is a pleasure, particularly being here with Hermia and Debbie and Samya. This is a pleasure to share a little bit of what I know, and hopefully that we can grow together and learn together and move forward together. Because hey, at the end of the day, unless we are indigenous to this land, whether we're Black, white, or purple, we're all newcomers. Whether you're a newcomer from 2024 or 1824, we're all in this together. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christopher. And I really appreciated those principles of humility, the ability to learn for life, and to acknowledge that sometimes what we've learned may not be the only ways to learn, right? And giving credit and acknowledging different forms of learning and education that come from different cultures and different backgrounds and different histories and our ancestors. So we keep that in mind as we go through this this panel, and we hope to learn together and work on this, creating an anti-racist organization together. So I'll start with my first question, which is going to be a very heavy question, and I'll try to narrow it down a little bit in terms of how do we actually create an anti-racist organization, and how do we untangle some of the issues of interpersonal? So there's a lot of pieces in there, right? So there's that interpersonal relationship, the interpersonal racism, the discrimination, and then there's also that systemic discrimination that we might see in an organization. So maybe I'll start with Christopher in this one first, and then we'll move to Hermia.
I'm going to try to be brief because, as Samya mentioned, this is a very multi-layered question. So for me and Hermia, we have a very good rapport. We understand each other. So I'm going to start here, and I know Hermia is going to take it to a whole nother level. So for me, step one is how to create an anti-racist organization is to first understand how and why your organization is racist. And I'll give you an example. If we're in, and not just the organization, the system that you operate in. If we are in the newcomer settlement or the immigration settlement system, and your organization supports newcomers or immigrants, you need to fundamentally understand how the Canadian immigration system is founded on principles of racism, exclusion, and oppression. Meaning, we need to go back to the immigration policies and legislations of the 1800s to see, how did immigration begin? How did settlement begin? And if we're going to start there, we need to go back to understand the concept of settler colonialism. How were indigenous peoples, and I like how Debbie began the conversation saying, we're treaty people. How did settler colonialism begin? How did Europeans displace and murder indigenous peoples to set up colonies here. We need to understand that, because once we understand that, then we can begin to understand formal immigration legislation and policies in Canada. If we're working in this space, we must understand the 1906 and 1910 immigration policies. These two policies in Canada were fundamentally rooted in the fact that we could exclude, I'm saying we as a Canadian, that we could exclude people based on race. Moreover, if we're looking at 1906 and 1910, this had the whole qualities of eugenics, that if you were defined as a person with a disability, we could exclude you. So for me, when we want to say, how can we create an anti-racist organization, if we don't understand how our system was fundamentally racist, we cannot even begin to understand how to fix it, because we just assume in a lot of cases when it comes to immigration and settlement that 1967 with the point system was the beginning of immigration in Canada. But even with the point system, we need to understand how that was built on exclusionary and racist principles. We need to understand the different phases of immigration departments. For example, manpower and immigration. So we've had this rooted in the sense that immigration has always been tied with economics in the economy. So then in the 2020s, it will make more sense to us when there's this economic driven conversation to, let's continue to exclude family reunification in Canada. So Samya, I'm just going to start with that first part of the question and then jump to Hermia. And if we have time, you can jump back, because there's a lot to that first question there.
Thank you for setting that foundation. Go ahead, Hermia.
Yes, I'm really happy that Christopher, you've started with that, because it while you spoke, it made me reflect on the anti-racism training that I did. I think you were the lead curriculum developer on that training, and it's hosted through OCASI. And oh my, I think we just got, I don't know, just a sliver. That training really delves into not just the immigration system, but every system in Canada, and shows you that thread of colonization that comes through, and how we now as treaty people, we sometimes perpetuate the system, unfortunately, because we're working within it, right? And so, and we're funded through it. And so, as a result, it really, again, just is a very good foundational piece, that training, in terms of this piece around learning and unlearning and being open to learn more, and also to face those hard truths, those uncomfortable truths of, Canada is a country that is very humanistic, where we open our borders. And so when we do so, what is that process like for a person going through the immigration system? What is that process like when you get your permanent residence and you're here in Canada, living day to day? And what is that process like where we as organizations are helping to serve immigrants and others who live in Canada? So really good starting point. And I encourage everyone, I'm doing a plug-in for OCASI. Please take that course. It's a good one. It's an eye-opener. And maybe it's things that we already know and it becomes a refresher. And sometimes we do need those in our practice. So I'll talk a little bit more about CDCD now, in terms of, having gone through our own assessment as an organization, each of us in our own way, but as a collective. And it just reminds me that, there's this expression that we use a lot, that for change to happen, it has to happen at the top. And I believe it's true. It really has to start, at the highest level, with our boards, our EDs, our CEOs, our supervisors, trickles down to our frontline staff, then to our volunteers who also help us to co-deliver services as well. And at all of these different levels, we all have responsibilities individually and collectively to account for how we deliver the services, to also be open to challenging the status quo, to also be willing to courageously take action. And I think when we say start at the top, a lot of what that drives, even the decisions that we do in terms of how we operationalize and program our agencies, is for our policies, our practices, the culture that we set at our agencies. I reflect and I think that organizations spend a lot of time creating visions and missions. A lot of time we get consultation from external experts, quote unquote, air quotes, from our clients, from our staff. And that is so key because that becomes that guiding point, right? That this is what we're trying to achieve. This is how we do it. This is the standards. I think it's also important that as we're doing those big pieces of heavy work, that we also remember to foster equity, inclusion, and belonging. At least those languages and how we're going to do that at an operational and programming level within our agencies. And so I'll talk a little bit about our HR policies. So in 2019, CDCD, along with myself, as a partnership, that's what I do. I love the way our board refers to our relationship. It's a partnership with the ED. And so we were in this partnership and we agreed jointly that we needed to contract an HR specialist. Her name was Tana Turner, and she's well known for social justice work, anti-oppression work, and anti-racism work. And so she very intentionally, with input from us, from staff, from the management team, helped us to embed those principles into our policies. We then had the board do anti-oppression training, and then we identified areas for inclusion and belonging through a staff satisfaction survey. So I know a lot of us say we do surveys with our staff, with our volunteers, with our clients. And sometimes when we get the results, we're like, we do a lot of work and we still find ourselves having to. But the truth is hard and we have to embrace the truth. And I think when we do that, that then allows us to know what are the areas that we intentionally need to focus on. So out of that 2019 experience, we then decided to establish committees within our agency. And the way they're set up is that they're co-chaired by a manager or a team lead along with a staff. And then the composition of each committee has representation from all departments. So this allows there to be decision-making experiences across the agency. So not just managers making decisions, but staff are part of that decision-making process. Another thing that we did is to make the committee participation mandatory. And then we included their active participation, the activities that they do throughout the year as part of their performance review evaluation. So that gives us that accountability piece. So I'll share some of the committees we established and what really brings each one to life. So the first one that was established under my leadership, guess what? DEI committee. It was the first one. And it was immediately after George Floyd incident in May 2020. A group of us, very diverse backgrounds at the agency, very passionate, really just wanted to make a change. You know, the board had done some of the work, the managers had done some of the work, and we were like, you know, we need as an organization for all of us to be doing change together. And so we invited a Black advocate and facilitator, Stephen Linton, some of you may know him, to hold a session for staff who identified as Black within the agency. We started there first because that incident was just so heart-wrenching that we just needed a safer space for those of us who were Black to be able to share our experience. And then upon that recommendation after that session was that we then should do one for all staff because we knew just as human beings, we were all impacted by it. And so in that session now, the focus was on the history of slavery in Canada, defining key terms like discrimination, microaggression, introducing concepts of decolonization. And so we also wanted it to be very experiential. And so we brought real life workplace scenarios into the session as a way of being able to create that fishbowl and, how do you do this? If you're a bystander, how do you do this? Right? And so really started to have those hard conversations and to address issues that people encounter in their daily lives, and we want to give them the tools to be able to do the work should they encounter it. So following that, we then set up an anti-GBV committee. We have a staff who is a long-standing anti-GBV champion through OCASI. And so the work that has been done through her leadership, it's a frontline staff, has just been, we're all just learning from her and her experiences and the connections that she's making with partners. We also partnered with METRAC, and METRAC did an audit, an anti-GBV audit of our policies. And so that allowed us to do some updates. We've now partnered with the Ability Center because we now have an accessibility committee. And again, they will be doing audits of our policies to help us to focus more on inclusive accessibility. We have a wellness committee, again, led by staff and one manager. We got every staff to do psychological health and safety training. We also partnered with OCASI that allowed us to introduce mental health supports in settlement services through the agency. I'm happy to say that we were one of the finalists of the 2024 Charity Village Award for Mental Health in the Workplace. And through that work with OCASI, we were able to present our experience at the P2B conference. We have a communications committee, social media, social committee, and joint health and safety committee. And so I think another thing that the board did, and that was new for our agency, was that in January 2020, CDCD's board of directors made a bold and historic decision to hire the agency's first Black female executive director in 50 years of operations. Turns out it was me. I guess I was up for the challenge. So at the time, I was only one of 5 Black EDs in the region that I knew of. And despite Durham having over 500 not-for-profit organizations, sadly, that number hasn't grown significantly. Before that, I had experience with the agency for 6 years, 6.5 years as the Welcome Center manager. And then I also had been an active participant of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, Committee of Practice Network in Durham. And that was before I transitioned into my role as ED. And so through those conversations, at one point we had Kwasi Kafili come, and he did some sessions with us as a collective of organizations. And through that, we started to consult with our different partners, racialized partners. So we worked with the organizations who are Asian serving, a few anti-Black organizations. We also met with Indigenous knowledge keepers, and then we all decided to create anti-Black, anti-racism, anti-Asian, anti-Indigenous racism statements. And to date, we have it posted on our website and also in our email signatures. But we took it one step further as an organization, because for our dialogue with Kwasi and Stephen Linton, we felt it was important for us as part of our land acknowledgement to also reflect the transatlantic slave trade and the legacy of slavery in our land acknowledgement. And so we've done that. And so for us, it's as we learn, we stay in those spaces of discomfort, and then we look for areas for change. And then we embrace that change, and then we then look to how can we do better as an organization in terms of pushing the needle for anti-racism and anti-oppression. Even Dr. Christopher has done sessions for us at our leadership level. He did a really fantastic, again, just a great resource. Please reach out to him. I'm telling you, he opens your eyes. So he did a DEI leadership in the workplace training for our management team. And to this day, we still speak your name, Christopher. And so I know we'll invite you again. And so I guess, I talk a lot about the newcomer piece, but again, like I said, we're a social planning council. And so not only do we look inward in terms of the anti-oppression, anti-racism work, but we also do it in our civic engagement work. So for example, we help underrepresented voices shape local policies at the Durham region policy level. We do that through our seniors newcomer advisory group. We have a youth advisory group, and they participate in strategic planning conversations with the region. We also partnered with the town of Ajax in 2022 to help unsheltered individuals participate in the municipal elections. Again, that was new for them. We don't have an address, so how can we vote? We did the research and we showed them how to vote, right? And so it's those practical pieces of aligning that work in your operations, in who you are, embedded in the fabric of who you are, that helps to have that lasting impact that's needed in order for change to happen. So I think I'll stop there. Sorry, I think I did a mouthful, and I know that the question has a second part, which is the interpersonal racism and systemic discrimination pieces. So Samya, over to you, unless if Christopher, you want to add anything else?
Thank you, Hermia. So I think you covered a lot. You answered a lot of the questions that I had. You covered hiring practices, you covered governance, you covered how to work with community. But there's one question that I really want to ask, and I think we often are a little bit shy to ask because, as Chris and Hermia both mentioned, we work in a colonial system. The nonprofit sector is a colonial structure, and we're often kind of funded and pitted against each other while we're doing this work. So my question, maybe Christopher, you can start with this one, is where we know where our money is coming from. And so that influences the way that we do anti-racism work. Can you talk a little bit about that and how do we negotiate that whole structure to make sure that we're doing this work honestly?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So that blends into the second part of the first question as well. It's the first thing we need to do is understand that there are multiple forms of racism. I think a lot of the time, particularly in Canada, we understand and we can articulate interpersonal racism. We know that it's wrong to call, well, I should say, we think we should know it's wrong to call Black people the N-word. Again, I can't get in too many details, but clearly that is not the case for many people. So we understand those individual acts of racism are wrong. But one thing we don't truly understand, and the conversation in 2020 really pushed this, and we saw the backlash across North America, is understanding institutional and systemic racism, which fits into this question of where is the money coming from? And the way that I unpack this language around systemic racism, I'm going to tie this to where the money's coming from as well. It's instead of asking people, what is institutional racism? Ask folks this: do you feel comfort? When you wake up in the morning and you leave your home, are you comfortable? When you get on whatever form of transport, particularly public transport, do you feel comfortable? When you get to work, are you comfortable? When you travel, are you comfortable? If you're in a public space and you ask to use a washroom, are you comfortable using that washroom that you want to use, not what people perceive for you to use? And I ask this, and I tell people ask themselves these questions because a lot of the times, folks might answer, oh, I've never even thought about that question because I've never felt discomfort. And then I ask them, well, if you've never felt discomfort, maybe the system was built for your identities. Maybe it was built for you. So instead of telling somebody you're racist or institutional racism, ask them these questions. If it's late at night and you park your car and you're not concerned where the street lights are, or if you've parked close to a wooded area, Maybe that parking lot was designed by an engineer who didn't think about sexual violence. When you get on a plane with the name Christopher Stuart Taylor, and you're not concerned about being randomly checked until they actually see me, but anyways, you're not worried about being randomly checked. Maybe you need to start unpacking the histories of the name Christopher Stuart Taylor. What if I was named Tyrone Muhammad? What's that experience? And so I say all this to understand for folks to say, well, we need to understand how these nonprofit and not-for-profit and charitable organization, even philanthropy, how that works, how government funding works. If you are getting government funding, and we see this particularly in academia, there's certain criteria you have to hit. And when you're done, what do we all do in these spaces? You must provide a report. And if your outcomes don't align to what the funding agency wanted, what happens? Do you get money next year? And if it's tied to government funding or from a philanthropist who might be very well-meaning, they might pull the money. So you're sitting in this space now. I want to help the most disadvantaged folks, marginalized and excluded, but I have to make sure the money keeps on flowing. And if I upset the person because I don't believe what they're doing is correct, they pull the plug. And I always come back to one thing, particularly when it comes to money and how we talk about racism. We need to understand that we live in that we live in a settler colonial space. But settler colonialism is fundamentally tied to imperialism, mercantilism, and capitalism. Period, full stop. If you want to learn more, read Eric Williams's book, Capitalism and Slavery. So if we know money is tied to racism, and we know that our agencies and our environments, our institutions are tied to dollars and cents, then we know they're racist. Again, understanding the difference between interpersonal racism and racism embedded in a system where privilege is only a handful of people. So it makes it very difficult to have that conversation, like myself. And as Samya had mentioned, and Hermia had mentioned, if I call out these systems and say, hey, post-secondary education, which it is racist and oppressive and sexist. On an individual level, what's going to happen to me? I lose my job. If I lose my job in a capitalist society, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to buy groceries? How am I going to put my kids in daycare? How am I going to get to and from work? So we're really sitting in this very precarious space that we want to do more, but for us with our eyes open, we know what the risks could potentially be if we call it out. So it's a very interesting space we're in, but my argument always is live with integrity. And integrity doesn't necessarily mean righteous and give up everything for everybody else. Integrity is understanding the space you're in and doing what you can to change at the margins. Very big question I try to distill in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That was really helpful. And Hermia, if you don't mind, and you mentioned a lot of the processes that your organization took in trying to create an anti-racist organization. One thing I wanted to, and this may be my last question for you, and then we'll turn to audience Q&A just because we're running out of time. In terms of tensions, because we know this is challenging process. It might be a discomforting process. How do you negotiate and manage tensions and conflict when it comes up, when it's related to racial equity and racial justice, whether it's between staff or it could be between staff and clients, staff and supervisors? How did you manage that as you were on your journey?
Thank you. Really good question also. So, like I said, as an organization, we're always in a state of learning and growing and changing and reflecting and starting all over again. I think one of the things that we really try to do as an organization is to be a compassionate employer. We really take the idea of CDCD being a family, and I do it in air quotes because I know it's a business we're running and we have to balance the two. But we really try to create that welcoming, supportive atmosphere for our colleagues, for ourselves, for everyone that we work with, for people who walk through our doors. I think having a welcome center really just, we exemplify the word because we really do our best to put our clients at ease. And I guess as a leadership team, we very proudly say that our staff, do an exemplary job in creating rapport with clients and creating safer spaces for them and engaging them. And so as leaders, we now refer to our staff as, in air quotes, our clients. So we now do our best to exemplify the same in terms of, building healthy relationship with staff, trying very hard to engage with them in a non-judgmental space. Something happened, you need to vent, be human first. In a private space, of course, right? Respectfully to the audience that you're speaking with. Let it out. I sit and I'm like, I'm not a counselor, but I will listen. If it means it takes 2 hours, I will invest that 2 hours and not rush that person to ensure that they know that, we're listening, it's a trusted space, the relationship comes first. Another thing that we do, even though we try working towards creating that culture, we do know that conflict happens. And then we sometimes see conflicts as moment for change. Sometimes I reflect on the civil rights movement. It's in that space of conflict and tension, there was change. You think of all of the women's rights movement is the space of conflict, it led to change. So I think if I could just share some of the steps we do, even though we do put so much emphasis on as healthy a working relationship as we can, conflict happens. So we create the space for dialogue. Like I said, we allow people to bring your full self to the work, right? Don't leave half of yourself outside the door. And when we come, we say, let's be professional, right? We're humans. We're going to rob each other. We're going to have a difficult day when we stepped out of our car, things happened at home. So we encourage people to bring their full authentic self. We have respectful conversations. We do it individually with people, especially when it's a little bit heated. Then we do it with the other party, and then we facilitate mediations when people are ready. We also give very clear guidelines on what that communication should look like when they're together. What you did with me in closed doors is one thing. When you're now engaging the other party, we remind folks about the values that we all commit to as an organization. We also encourage them to ask, what would make that conversation respectful for you? What do you need from the other person? What do you bring to the table to the other person as well? So we co-create those guidelines together. I think my mediation background always pushes me to want a win-win solution. And so we try looking for that sweet spot. And we allow staff to guide that process, but knowing the two separate conversations and what each person's needs are, we try to do that. We also, accountability is key. We also know that things move when people own their mistakes, and sometimes we are the ones who've created the mistake. So as I said earlier, we own it. If it's staff, we help them to recognize the mistake that they've made, and how are you going to own that? One of the things that we've also observed is that we have to model the behavior that we also are asking of staff. I keep saying that we're on a stage. Sometimes I feel like it's like live theater. The very same way we observe staff who may have poor performance or are overachievers, in the very same way, they also observe us. So it's important that we look at language. It's important that we look at how we present self. It's important how we humanize the work environment. And so, that modeling is also very important. We also sometimes realize that staff uses the language as a way of pushing back, as a way of challenging, things that are brought to their attention. They would say, is it because I'm Black? Mm-mm. We've gotten better at documenting. We look at the performance pieces, we have the conversation, sometimes informally, sometimes formally, and then we summarize the conversation, we send it via email. We leave space open for people to make adjustments to what we've written as our understanding of the experience. We just had a dialogue. We leave space for them to give feedback just as long as the spirit of what was discussed remains solid. And then we know it's documented. So if it's a performance piece, while there is tension, we walk them through. Those are the things we've observed. Those are the conversations we've had. Those are the ways we've coached. Do you need more support? What training do you need? We offer trainings as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, people do use the language as a way of, not taking ownership. And so we do call out. We also do call out respectfully. We've also seen cases where people use the words interchangeably as a way of trying to express themselves. And so if an investigation takes place and it wasn't discrimination, it wasn't a microaggression, it wasn't that, we then use the moment as a teachable moment. Okay, so let's now talk about what really transpired. This is the outcome, but we also focus a little bit on the definition and help them to understand, while it may appear from the outcome of the investigation, which sometimes are led by external parties, not even ourselves, just again, to really bring transparency, ensure it's fair. So nobody who is in the agency could come across as being biased over one party over the other. Sometimes we do bring in an external person to lead the investigation, but we try our best to bring in components of learning and growing for all parties. And sometimes, depending on the severity of the situation, while we do work towards having, a harmonious work environment, sometimes we have to make those hard decisions and say, we need to go in another direction. So I think I'll end there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hermia. So I think it's some of the things that you mentioned and that I really liked is in terms of having some mediation skills, co-creating the solutions with the staff, truly listening to what's happened, and then taking accountability and ownership of a mistake. So whether it's the staff or whether it's the executives, that's really important for people to understand and acknowledge, documentation and being role models for your staff. So thank you for that. And as you mentioned, these tensions and conflicts are natural in the workplace. And so it's important for us to kind of be equipped with how to deal with them and to handle them. So in terms of my questions, I think I'll stop there, but we do have a few questions in the Q&A from the audience. So the first question, and either of you can start with that one. It's how can we determine if we have a racist organization? Are there any frameworks or tools beyond what's available, beyond informal knowledge that we have, just to kind of determine if an organization is racist? Go ahead, Christopher. I see you unmuted.
Go
So I'll be brief on this. Always come back to what I had originally said, is to understand where your organization came from. We have a racist immigration system in Canada. So not to say that your organization exhibits interpersonal racism, again, very different than systemic racism, not saying that. But if you are in a space that is based on a system that is racist and oppressive and sexist and ableist, by definition, and I saw a question in the chat come up, if by definition where we're starting from is oppressive, unfortunately, we are also in that oppressive space. And just because we might have people who look different in these particular leadership positions doesn't necessarily mean the system itself is different. And that's a hard pill to swallow. That's a very hard pill to swallow, particularly for people who look like myself, who might be leading an office or a space, that I need to have that humility and self-reflection to say, man, I might be causing damage towards my own people. That is what keeps myself up at night, having that knowledge. So again, I always want folks to come back to say, understand what the purpose is and where we're going.
Mhm.
Again, that's
Mhm.
very brief to a very large question, but I know we're short on
Mhm.
time, so I don't want to go too deep.
Go ahead,
Mhm.
Hermia. Anything to add?
You know, so I think some of the things we rely on at CDCD would be demographic data of our staff. You know, just having a breakdown in terms of race, education, age range, the gender balance of staff within a particular program. So that would be one of the things that tools that we have used. You know, another piece would be just how engaged some staff seem to be and some staff aren't. You know, some things you just observe. Like I'm going to give a practical example whereby, you know, in 2022, the government assisted Ukrainians came. And then following that, we then had the influx of African asylum claimants. And one staff came up to me and said to me, you know, Hermia, we need to have staff who are better reflective of this new clientele. And that they've observed that, you know, when staff of different demographics or backgrounds engage with them, the quality of service doesn't seem to be the same. They probably feel rushed, or you know, even sometimes when the clients leave, you know, they look at their demeanor. Again, those things are observations. It's not a tool, but it's the dialogue you have with staff. They work closely with the clientele. You know, they have a pulse that's a little bit stronger than mine sometimes, and our leadership. And I guess it's the fact that we create a space where people can come to us and tell us. I guess is our secret tool that we use. Also allows us to be you know, we certainly acknowledge, we find out more, we want to know more, and once we know and we get it, we're ready to take action. So as a result, we then applied for the NSP asylum claimant fundings. Thankfully, we were successful, and we made sure very explicitly in the job posting, we want language. And we were not deviating. We were not negotiating. I know it seems like it might be a little bit exclusionary, but the very same way we are able to hire Arabic speaking staff and Tamil speaking staff, we needed staff from certain who had the dialect of certain African countries, and we were unapologetic. That's what we were aiming for. So and then since then, you know, if I think of our staff, we're about 102, we say we're caring professionals, 19 of them are staff who were clients in those initial 2022, 2023. And we've hired them on. So from 2 to 19. So I think when we commit, we take the risk, we take the blowback, we deal with the fallout, we explain, we educate, we deal with the day-to-day perceptions, and we help to explain what the realities are for certain communities that we serve, and hence the reason why. So we give rationales.
Great. Thank you so much, Hermia. So the next question in the chat is for an organization that wants to create an anti-racism action plan for their organization. Do you have any recommendations for resources that would help inform them as they start that work and they want to go just beyond policies and annual training? And we can start with Christopher. Sorry, Hermia, go ahead, and then Christopher.
So I believe that all of us who are IRCC funded, it's mandatory that we create a 3-year anti-racism plan for organization. And so I think, you know, for us, we've done a lot of research online in terms of what the meat of that plan requires. We also, I pulled a little bit from, you know, my experience with that anti-racism training that OCASI provided. And again, I'm saying do it. I think it could be a really good foundational piece for all agencies. You know, I know we're asking for resources, but I think it's tapping into your networks as well. You know, I think at one point in time, there was a strong movement of a lot of different, very, you know, social justice minded facilitators were doing a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion trainings. I believe municipalities have them. Also the higher education institution have them. Christopher is on the line. He's a good resource. I know we've benefited from his work and will continue to do so. So I think it's tapping into your network, you know, and I think I would also say, and I'm sure OCASI plans on doing that is, you know, when OCASI leads an initiative, they tend to share it with the broader community. So like all of us, OCASI will be required to do an anti-racism plan as well. It's sharing that template, customizing it to your workplace based on, you know, the temperature check you've done in-house, right? It's not a one shoe fit for everybody, but it's knowing where your pressing points are. It's knowing where the points of interaction are. What is the first area you need to focus on? Like I said to you, for us, it was DEI, then anti-GBV work, because we were inspired, we were motivated, you know, we got that taste and we wanted more. And so it's, and then recognizing that as you work through that plan, it's going to be ongoing work. Right. And it may change from year to year. Year 1 might focus on one thing, year 2 focuses on something else, year 3, and you evaluate as you go along. Right.
Great, thank you for those practical steps and tools and resources. There's also some in the chat that folks have put in. So
Excellent.
and OCASI has their anti-racism, anti-oppression policy toolkit as well. Christopher,
That's right.
anything to add to that?
Yeah, just quickly, as Hermia said, there's so many resources online. OCASI has resources, provincial government has resources, federal government has resources. I think I've almost positioned myself here in a doom and gloom space, but I think it's very clear to articulate what your goals are. How do you define an anti-racist organization, anti-racist policy, anti-racist framework? Again, just be mindful of time. One of the struggles we have is that we conflate inclusion within existing systems as anti-racism. And by definition, anti-racism is about changing systems. It's like when we use the language of decolonization, you hear it a lot in different spaces. Fundamentally, and there's entire fields of studies on post-colonialism, decolonization. You know, decolonization is fundamentally about changing the colonial system. So again, it's always, and maybe this is the academic in me, what is our first question and what are we trying to fix? If we want to have more people in Canada accessing our existing education system, our existing healthcare system, fantastic. But if we say our healthcare system is fundamentally oppressive, then we need to be asking questions about how do we have better healthcare, not necessarily how do we have more doctors, if you understand that difference, right? So again, just wanted to frame that out there, but if we are asking the right questions that will support us, we're fine.
Great. And I think this is kind of related to the next question in the Q&A in terms of intentions and where we're starting from. So the question is, how do you create anti-racism policies and plans in spaces where this work is being mandated or requested by your funder? And are you able to create meaningful change because now it's mandatory for you to do so, not out of your own kind of will and intention, if you're not maybe starting from the right place? So, Hermia, do you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can ask Chris to add?
I think, and I'm saying this respectfully, given the nature of work that we do and the clientele that we serve, I think if we don't have the wheel already, then I'm concerned. I think it should, hopefully, grains of it should have already been part of our practice or even our policies and the way we operationalize things. I hear the point around, if it's mandated, it feels almost like you have an obligation now to do it. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing that we really now have to look internally and hopefully, walk the talk and not just simply write a report to meet all of the checkmarks, right? I think it's good that the funder is asking us to create the plan as opposed to giving us a plan, because now the plans that we create, as Christopher said, hopefully is driven by those questions that we're asking ourselves internally and what it is ultimately we're trying to achieve in this work. So I think that's where I would leave it and then let Christopher fly.
No, there's nothing to fly on. I mean, Hermia, you said everything exactly right. And I always come back to this, and we were kind of not joking, but we had a conversation before we started here. People have been asking these questions for 100+ years in this country. 100+ years. All the answers are there, all the questions are there, the language may have shifted. So if in 2025 we don't have the will to do better, that's the fundamental question, because no policy is going to save you, no framework is going to save you. It's essentially political will. And that's one thing that we saw in May 2020. All of a sudden, and I have a lot of conversation about that. All of a sudden, we had the political will to change. Fast forward a half decade later, right? So, do you have the will? Do you want to make change? If so, you'll make it. If not, you won't. The challenge that we have, and Hermia, you nailed it. We need to be very honest with some of these government mandates. There's one I'm specifically working on now. I can't speak for it when it addresses the public education sector, the post-secondary education sector. Ask yourself, why are they pushing this right now? What's the actual reason they're pushing this? And that's where we need to start to interrogate our decisions, to put it lightly.
Right. And one of the things that I encountered is sometimes when you're mandated and you don't have the right intentions from the get-go, as you get into this work and as you learn more, those intentions will naturally, hopefully, because this work is so critical, and if you're getting your information from the right resources, you're tapping the right people to support you. I think that intention will naturally develop as you
Yeah.
involve yourself and immerse yourself more and more into this work.
Agreed.
And Sam, you mind if I jump on that really quickly?
Yes, please go
And one
ahead.
thing I need us to be mindful of, because we might have the greatest intentions and it's going to evolve, but sometimes when we're trying to create an inclusive or a anti-racist space, we actually begin to create more barriers and boundaries for others. Prime example I love to use, the civil rights movement. Yes, we pushed across North America more support for Black people, but then we completely disregarded how that was impacting Black women. And then you had Black men oppressing Black women. We see it today if we've been following, particularly around Toronto, around BLM. we might be pushing Black Lives Matter, but what about Black trans lives? Right. So we need to be very aware of sometimes this push for anti-racism actually, even from the greatest intentions, is actually causing damage to other groups, and we're just closing our eyes to that. So just wanted to add that little caveat as we move forward.
Mhm, mhm.
Thank you.
So I think you're speaking to intersectionality there, right, Christopher? Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts from you, Hermia, before we close the session?
Hmm. Um, what can I say? You know, it's hard work. It's work that involves, you know, bringing up emotions. It's work that involves, you know, putting the mirror to yourself, to your agency. It's work that it requires continually immersing yourself in the evolution of the language and how it changes and how it moves, and you know the complexities of situations that come up. I'm not gonna shy to say I don't have the answers. When I don't have the answers, I call Debbie, I call other people on the board. I go to, we have 3 HR professionals on CDCD's board. I consult with them. We've also subscribed to HR Covered. I call them. We have legal represent. I call them. I call and I mean, we had a recent situation where that one was a new one for me, where a staff wore an item that had a degree of symbolism, and another, and there's a war going on in those 2 countries. and the other one felt offended. And I just went like, okay, I'm not equipped with this one. I had to own where I was in this discussion. And I called and I said, I really just want to educate me and also give me an objective view, because I see it from both sides, and help me to have me and my team to have a straight path as to how to do it. And even along the path, we had to adjust things, right? Because someone may give you advice, do it this way, but then as you're doing it, you're recognizing, can I dial it back a little bit, because that's where they are, meet people where they're at. And then, but ultimately working towards that outcome around, how do we resolve this? Everyone have freedom of expression, but how do we resolve this? Right? And everyone wants to have that sense of feeling like we belong, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, sometimes I would say, when in doubt, ask.
Yeah,
That's how
that's
I would, yeah,
that's a
ask for
really
help.
that's a good philosophy to go by. And I think you both mentioned that this work, there will be discomfort in there. And so we need to prioritize people's safety, their human rights, and, their inclusion into the organization, right? So other people may feel that that's discomfort, but again, like Christopher mentioned, you ask them like, why do you feel discomfort? Maybe the system is set up to for your advantage, and for people that look like you to be in an advantageous position. So those are really great points, and great conversation. And so this takes us to the end of our webinar, and I really truly want to thank our panelists, Hermia, Corbette, Christopher, Taylor, Stuart, for those enlightening discussions. Even being in an organization that is essentially a social justice organization, which I'm part of, I still learn a lot. And how to create an anti-racist organization. So oftentimes we take it for granted that just because we're created for racialized communities, we don't need to do this work, but we do, right? And that intersectionality and that solidarity and allyship work is so important for us all to take on in this journey. I want to thank the participants for joining us, OCASI member agencies, other partners, immigrant and refugee serving sector, because this work is not easy. And so you just being here speaks volumes on your passion and your commitment to doing anti-racism work. So thank you for that, and I hope we can see you again for the next webinar series. I want to thank the interpreters, I don't have the names for all of them. I apologize, but I thank you for being here. I thank the ASL interpreters as well for keeping up with us. At the end of this session, you will have a short survey that will launch as you exit Zoom. And your responses, I know, are really, really critical to helping OCASI determine how to plan their next sessions and make them more relevant to you. So if you can please fill that out, that would be really amazing. So once again, thank you, everybody. And I hope that, and I'm sure that you've learned a ton. I've definitely learned a lot from folks here. And hopefully we'll see you at the next one.
Mhm. Thank you. It was great sharing space with you, Christopher.
No, Hermia, as
And,
always, thank you.
Samya, anything you want to add, Christopher?
No, all good. Samya, Hermia, everyone, Debbie, thank you so
OCASI,
much. OCASI, thank you
thank
so much.
you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.